The day started like any other, but when I opened the mailbox, my hands froze around the thick official envelope. My heart immediately thumped, a warning I couldn't ignore. The bold letters on the front made my stomach twist, a summons to appear in court. I couldn't believe it at first, reading the words over and over, trying to convince myself it was a mistake. My family had always assumed I'd stay in the shadows, overlooked, ignored, and dismissed. So the very idea that I was now formally recognized in this way felt surreal and terrifying. Memories flooded in. Years of being second best, my siblings praised for achievements I had quietly made possible, my parents patting them on the back while barely acknowledging me. Each act of favoritism, each subtle insult, each birthday forgotten, and each inheritance assumption weighed heavily as I stared at the summons. Anxiety clawed at me, a mix of fear and a strange, trembling anticipation. I thought of walking into that courtroom, where every eye would be on me, every whisper scrutinizing, every glance from my family a potential dagger. Could I withstand the judgment, not just of the court, but of those who had built a lifetime of underestimation against me? My mind raced with questions, scenarios, and possibilities. Yet beneath the anxiety, a spark of something unexpected glimmered. Hope. Hope that maybe finally the scales could tip, that my silence, patience, and endurance might no longer be invisible. And in that moment, holding the envelope with shaking fingers, I realized this was more than a court date. It was the beginning of a reckoning I had never dared to imagine. My pulse quickened with a mixture of dread and excitement, knowing that whatever happened next, I would no longer be invisible, overlooked, or powerless. This notice was a challenge, a test of courage, and a doorway to the justice I had longed for, and deep down, I knew I was ready to face it, even if my family had no idea what they were about to witness. I remembered the day my older brother received the promotion I had worked tirelessly for, the same promotion I had subtly built the project for, the same long nights and sacrifices no one would ever see. My parents' smiles were reserved for him, their praise for my diligence dismissed as expected, ordinary, almost invisible. That was just one example among countless others. Birthdays passed without acknowledgement. Achievements I quietly celebrated were met with polite nods, while my siblings' smallest victories were celebrated with grand gestures and applause. Even inheritance talks, whispered in hushed tones behind closed doors, excluded me entirely. I was expected to be content, to nod, to stay in my corner, while they claimed what they wanted as if my presence didn't exist. I recalled holidays where I cooked meals no one appreciated, family gatherings where laughter seemed to exclude me, where someone always whispered, "She's too quiet," or "She'll never amount to much." At weddings and birthdays, I would smile while my heart ached, watching my siblings bask in attention, their successes elevated while mine faded into the background. I had loved them, helped them, supported them, and sacrificed in ways no one acknowledged. Each flashback carried the sting of rejection, the silent loneliness of invisible labor, the aching desire for recognition that never came. And yet, through it all, a simmering sense of injustice festered within me, quietly building, a fire waiting for the right spark. This pattern wasn't just coincidence. It was deliberate, consistent, and it defined every interaction I had ever had with my family. As I thought back, the weight of all those small betrayals pressed on me, sharpening the edges of my anticipation. The summons wasn't just a legal notice. It was a portal into a reckoning I had imagined countless times in the shadows of their favoritism, rehearsing silently what I might say, how I might finally claim the acknowledgement I had been denied for decades. The day I found the envelope slipped under my door, I felt a jolt that went straight through me. It wasn't from my family. I recognized the handwriting, careful, discreet, deliberate. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small folded packet of documents. My hands trembled as I unfolded them, scanning quickly yet carefully. There it was, a clause in my late uncle's will, hidden away and overlooked by everyone. A stipulation that gave me legal standing in the property my family had assumed I'd never touch. Alongside it were emails, financial statements, and letters that no one had expected me to find. Evidence of decisions and transfers that pointed to favoritism and mismanagement, all favoring my siblings until now. For the first time in years, I felt the stirring of hope. This wasn't just paperwork. It was a roadmap to balance the scales that had always been tipped against me. I read every line, my pulse quickening as I realized the opportunity it presented. The unfairness of years of neglect and dismissal suddenly seemed conquerable, tangible, within reach. Thoughts raced. How would I approach the courtroom? How would I keep my composure when every eye, especially my family's, was trained on me? Yet alongside fear, a quiet confidence emerged, an almost thrilling anticipation. The spark of hope ignited planning, strategy, and imagination, transforming what had been a passive, overlooked existence into the beginning of an assertive, calculated path to justice. I could almost feel the power shift, not yet complete, but imminent, waiting for me to take the first step. For the first time, the possibility of standing equal to them, of having my voice heard and my worth recognized, felt real. I spent hours pacing my small apartment, the documents spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle I was finally allowed to solve. I imagined walking into the courtroom, my head held high, my family's smug faces slowly registering the shock they didn't see coming. What would my mother say when she realized I knew every detail they tried to hide? Would my brother's confident smirk falter when I presented evidence he never thought I could access? I rehearsed my words over and over, silent in my own living room, practicing the calm, measured tone that would make them underestimate me just enough. I even allowed myself a tiny, guilty smirk, imagining my sister's jaw dropping when the judge acknowledged my rightful claim. It was a private rehearsal of justice, a mental chess game where I had all the pieces they never knew existed. Each scenario, each imagined gasp or whispered panic, fueled a growing sense of empowerment that contrasted sharply with the powerless girl who had silently endured years of favoritism and dismissal. As I mapped out responses to their possible objections, a subtle thrill ran through me. For the first time, I wasn't just imagining revenge, I was preparing to deliver it with precision. I laughed softly at the irony. The very family who had treated me like I didn't matter would soon realize they had misjudged me entirely. And with that thought, the tension tightened and stretched, anticipation building, each heartbeat echoing the coming confrontation. I stepped out of the car, smoothing the front of my coat and taking a deep breath. The courthouse loomed ahead, imposing and silent, and for the first time, I felt the weight of all those years of neglect pressing behind me. As I entered, my eyes immediately found my family, clustered together like they owned the space, smug grins plastered across their faces. My brother's cufflinks glinted under the fluorescent lights, a subtle reminder of the wealth and status he always flaunted. My mother clutched her designer bag a little too tightly, her posture rigid, as if the elegance around her could shield her from the storm that was about to hit. Every detail, the polished shoes, the subtle scent of expensive perfume, the way they whispered to each other with knowing glances, was a calculated display of superiority, a silent challenge to anyone who dared question them. I could feel the contrast sharpen inside me. Their arrogance, their expectation that I would falter, weighed against my quiet confidence and the knowledge they had overlooked. I smiled inwardly, letting anticipation build, savoring the simmering tension. Each step toward the courtroom felt heavier yet thrilling, as if every moment was pulling me closer to the point where all those assumptions would crumble. The air seemed charged, thick with unspoken expectations, and in that charged silence, I realized I was the only one who truly understood the power I now held. The moment I stepped into the courtroom, time seemed to slow. Every eye turned toward me, the weight of decades of invisibility pressing against my chest. The judge, looking over the top of her glasses, paused and finally asked the words that made my heart leap and my stomach tighten at the same time. "Why are you here?" A murmur rippled through the room, my family's whispers sharp and incredulous. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief, while my brother's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. I felt the power of the moment in full, knowing that this single question had already begun to shift the room, to unsettle the people who had always assumed I would remain invisible. I inhaled slowly, forcing calm into my voice before speaking, each word deliberate, measured, laced with the quiet confidence they had never expected. The tension was electric, thick and unrelenting, as if every breath held the promise of revelation. Their incredulity only fueled my resolve, and beneath the surface, a thrill stirred at watching them falter, even slightly, under the weight of their own assumptions. I held their gaze without flinching, and in that instant, I knew the game had truly begun. I thought back to all the times I had quietly carried my family's burdens, the sacrifices no one ever noticed. I had stayed up countless nights helping my brother finish projects, proofreading reports, and covering mistakes that could have cost him dearly, never receiving so much as a thank you. I had funded parts of my sister's education, insisting she take opportunities while I remained in the background, my own ambitions quietly deferred. Birthdays, holidays, celebrations. I was always the one who prepared, who organized, who smoothed tensions, while my contributions were met with casual indifference. I remembered comforting them during breakups, lending money with the expectation it would never be repaid, listening patiently to their complaints while my own struggles were minimized or ignored. At every gathering, I was the invisible support, the silent labor that kept the family machinery running, and yet they thrived, unaware or unwilling to see the depth of my care, treating me as someone expendable, someone easily dismissed. The weight of all that unnoticed devotion pressed on me even now, and as I recalled each moment, my empathy for myself mingled with a simmering frustration at their callousness. Every unrecognized effort, every ignored act of love, had been a brick in the wall that kept me invisible to them. And yet, with the summons in my hand and the documents ready, that wall was about to crumble. I stood before the judge, heart steady despite the pounding in my chest, and began to lay out the evidence I had spent weeks organizing. The first document was a letter tucked away in an old file, proving the inheritance clause my family had assumed would never be challenged. I watched my brother's confident posture stiffen, his smirk faltering as he recognized the weight of the paper in my hands. Next came the emails, exchanges between relatives and lawyers that clearly documented decisions made behind my back, decisions favoring my siblings while overlooking my contributions and claims. With each page I presented, gasps rippled through the courtroom. My mother shifted uncomfortably, clutching her purse while my sister's eyes darted, trying to mask disbelief. I could see them counting on my silence, expecting me to fumble or falter. But I spoke with clarity, deliberate calm, letting the evidence speak louder than any words I could have forced. The financial statements I revealed confirmed years of favoritism, mismanagement, and assumptions that I would never step forward. Each revelation subtly undermined their arrogance, and I felt a thrill of vindication ripple through me as the judge leaned forward, clearly engaged and attentive. The room's energy shifted. The power I had silently cultivated now radiated from me, a quiet force that unsettled everyone who had assumed I was powerless. I held their gaze, letting the tension linger, knowing this was only the beginning of their reckoning. My brother rose first, clearing his throat with an air of practiced authority, attempting to dismiss my evidence as trivial, irrelevant, or misinterpreted. "These documents don't prove anything," he insisted, his voice tight with the tension I knew he was barely containing. My mother interjected, her words dripping with thinly veiled accusation, implying I was being dramatic or misunderstanding family intentions. "You've always blown things out of proportion," she said, eyes flicking between the judge and me, hoping to sway the perception in her favor. My sister chimed in, attempting to frame me as manipulative, suggesting I was seeking attention rather than justice. I felt their coordinated barrage as a wave of desperation, a collective panic thinly disguised by arrogance. Internally, I cataloged every weak point, every faltering glance, every micro-expression of uncertainty they betrayed, and I couldn't help but smirk at how desperate they were becoming. I reflected on years of inequality, the constant contrast between their wealth, status, and casual disregard for me, and my quiet endurance and resilience. Now, standing firm, I realized that the moral weight rested on my side. Every argument they launched was built on assumptions and entitlement, while I had truth, patience, and preparation as my allies. The tension thickened with each passing second, the courtroom charged with anticipation, and I sensed that the climactic confrontation, when their arrogance would meet undeniable proof, was rapidly approaching. Every whispered objection only fueling the impending vindication I had meticulously orchestrated. I cleared my throat, lifting the final document with deliberate care, letting the suspense stretch just long enough for the room to feel it. "There's one more clause," I said softly, though the weight behind my voice carried authority. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows rising, and the murmurs around the courtroom swelled. I carefully explained the stipulation, hidden for decades, one my family had never noticed, never expected, one that directly invalidated their assumptions and confirmed my rightful claim. The evidence was undeniable, signed, notarized, and completely in my favor. Gasps echoed through the room. My mother's hand flew to her face, her eyes wide with disbelief. My brother's confident smirk crumbled into a flicker of panic, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Even my sister's lips parted in stunned silence, as if the floor had opened beneath her. The judge's gavel remained untouched, yet the power shift was palpable. For the first time, my family seemed small, ordinary, vulnerable, exposed in their arrogance. I felt a rush of vindication surge through me. The years of quiet suffering suddenly transformed into a tangible triumph. The courtroom vibrated with tension, the audience of onlookers leaning in as if the very air held its breath. Every calculated glance, every subtle revelation had led to this explosive reversal, and I knew that from this moment forward, nothing would ever be assumed about me again. The hidden clause had not just changed the case, it had shattered the illusion of their invincibility, leaving them unsteady, and the room charged with my newfound power. The judge's gavel finally came down, echoing through the courtroom like a drumbeat of justice. "The court rules in favor of the plaintiff," she declared, her voice calm but definitive. Relief and triumph surged through me, a heady mix of vindication and quiet satisfaction. My family's faces shifted, shock, disbelief, and the faintest hint of shame flickered across features that had always seemed untouchable. My mother's eyes brimmed with unshed tears. My brother's jaw tightened as if he were trying to clamp down on the reality he had ignored for decades, and my sister's hands fidgeted nervously, unable to hide her unease. I remained composed, every motion controlled, every breath measured, letting the weight of the moment speak louder than any words I could muster. There was no gloating, no dramatic flourish, just a steady, calm assertion of truth. The years of dismissal, favoritism, and quiet suffering had culminated in this instant of moral justice, and I felt it deeply. The courtroom's energy shifted entirely. Whispers of astonishment and murmurs of respect rippled outward, and I realized that my dignity, maintained through patience and resilience, now contrasted starkly with their stunned humiliation. The satisfaction was complete, visceral, and more powerful than I had imagined. My rightful place had been recognized, and the injustice that had haunted me for years had finally been addressed. I stepped out of the courtroom, the sunlight hitting my face like a quiet affirmation of everything I had endured and achieved. My family followed, their expressions a mix of disbelief, envy, and begrudging acknowledgement, though none dared meet my eyes fully. As I walked, memories of every unnoticed effort, every silent sacrifice, every humiliation surfaced, weaving through my thoughts like a montage of the life I had quietly lived. I remembered late nights helping siblings with projects, holidays spent smoothing tensions, and countless moments when I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. Yet now, each memory felt less like a wound and more like proof of my resilience. The injustice I had endured no longer defined me. It had sharpened my resolve and clarified my strength. With each step, I felt a surge of empowerment, a deep sense of closure, knowing that my dignity remained intact, while their arrogance had been subtly shattered. The thrill of watching them absorb the reality of my vindication mingled with the quiet satisfaction of personal growth, leaving me both triumphant and reflective. For the first time in years, I felt fully seen, not just by the courtroom or my family, but by myself. As I finally sat alone, away from the murmurs and lingering stares, I let myself breathe deeply and reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The years of being overlooked, dismissed, and undervalued had been painful, yet they had forged a strength I had never fully recognized until now. Every sacrifice, every moment of silent endurance, every unacknowledged effort had shaped the person I had become, resilient, patient, and strategically wise. I understood now that my worth was never dependent on their approval, that dignity was something I carried inherently, regardless of their recognition. Yet there was a bittersweet ache beneath the satisfaction, a quiet acknowledgement of what I had endured, and the family ties that might never fully mend. Still, I felt pride in the calm assertion of justice, in the way I had claimed my place without compromising my integrity. The courtroom victory had been more than legal. It had been moral and personal, a culmination of perseverance and insight. In this quiet moment, I realized that I had earned something far more valuable than validation from them: self-respect, inner peace, and the clarity that justice could exist, even in the face of betrayal. Even as the courtroom emptied and the echoes of the verdict faded, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The documents, the evidence, and the courtroom triumph had shifted power in my favor. But life, I knew, had a way of throwing unexpected challenges at the most confident moments. I glanced at my family one last time, noting their restrained glances and unspoken calculations, and I realized that winning today didn't erase the patterns of manipulation and entitlement. They were still there, lurking, waiting. A quiet smile touched my lips as I thought about the next steps. Plans I had already begun to imagine. Opportunities to assert control, and avenues where I could finally rewrite the story entirely on my terms. Perhaps there would be new battles, unforeseen revelations, or moments that tested my patience even further. But for now, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction, tempered with anticipation, knowing that the narrative of my life was finally mine to direct. And deep down, I felt a thrill at the thought that the best surprises were still to come.